Voices from the Vault by Devendra P. Varma. And this collection was published in 1987. It's an anthology of vampires and ghosts. So I figured it was a good book in between the different paranormal books that I've been covering in the last few weeks. And I'll leave links to those videos down below if you haven't seen them. And I'm moving into vampires after this. So Dracula, Salem's Lot, Marked, and the Vampire Chronicles. So I figured this was a nice in-between book. The book begins with a history that covers mostly information about vampires, why they've been so prevalent in literature, and keeping in mind this is published in 1987, so it's only going to go so far in what was current at that time. It talks about the first vampire, which was published in 1819 by Dr. John Polidori, and his work was based on an outline and a draft that was put together by Lord Byron, an associate of his. So that particular work, The Vampire, was considered the start of a new genre. The editor of this collection goes on to talk about vampires around the world, a bit of the different history, the literature, as well as the folklore. What I did with this particular collection, in the table of contents, as I was reading the short stories, is I made note of different things that came up that isn't common to all the vampire stories. So, for example, in Dom Daniel, they know that it's a vampire because there are hairy palms. I haven't come across that in any of the other vampire stories that I can think of. The Tomb of Sarah, which is quite a good read, and that's by F.G. Loring. It involves renovations, having to move a tomb from one location to another. And in this particular story, and it involves a church and a priest, the host is involved as well as dog roses. So that's something unique to that short story. The Room in the Tower involves a picture that they try to move and they discover that their hands end up being bloody and the picture finds its way back to where it was moved from. So there are a few twists and turns in that story. The Beautiful Vampire. In this story, holy water impacts the vampire, and it's about a priest and having to make some very difficult choices. A Call in the Blood by Margaret L. Carter keeps you going right up until the last paragraph, and there are some interesting twists and turns in this particular story. The Cloak by Robert Bloch is a story about a Halloween party and trying to get a costume in time, as well as some food for thought about giving consideration to who you want to go out as on Halloween. The Phantom Coach by Amelia B. Edwards I found to be extremely creepy in a good way, but it was odd, so I'm going to have to go back and read it again to make sense of it. The narrator's telling a story 20 years later, and he's out in a snowstorm and trying to get his way back home. He goes to a home where there's just a servant and an owner. He stays there for a little bit and then he's back out and warned to be careful for a broken parapet. He's warned to be careful as he's walking along, and that they let him know that there's a coach that was coming, and to be careful because 9 years before there had been an accident and the coach had gone over a cliff. The coach comes, the gentleman gets in, and notices there's something very unusual about the people he's taking a ride with. The man on the stairs, which is anonymous, and that's unfortunate because I really enjoyed this story. And it's a story about being very careful about the games that you choose to play with other people and getting caught in your own deception. In this case, it's winter time. There are two gentlemen who are planning to swindle another gentleman. They're staying at his fancy home, and they have everything worked out and figure nothing can possibly go wrong. They may have gotten away with it if not for the fact that an image from a picture in the house disappeared and had some plans of its own. The Judge's House is definitely one of my favorite short stories in this collection for two reasons. One, it's by Bram Stoker, and I'll be covering Dracula in my next video, also by Bram Stoker. There are different elements to the Judge's House. There's a picture of a very unpleasant individual. There's a young man who is totally absorbed in his work and just wants somewhere to work quietly. And things definitely take a different twist. And although you have an idea of what's coming up in the story, it still keeps you going because you keep hoping that there's going to be something that turns out a bit differently. But I definitely enjoyed the read. If you like short stories and you enjoy stories about ghosts or vampires, then Voices from the Vault is a book that you may enjoy. Again, be sure to check your local library or hop on over to Goodreads and see what other people who have read this book think about it. Until next time, happy reading!